Well, hello everyone. Welcome to this live study that we have today about the esoteric symbolism of Christmas. Actually, I couldn't give it earlier this week because I was sick with a bad cold. And it was difficult for me to prepare this topic earlier, but here we are today. And today we are going to study on the true meaning behind that, what many people usually celebrate on December 25th every year, and which is known as Christmas. Let me just check that everything is okay here with the broadcast, so we start immediately with today's topic. Remember that if you have any question, feel free to leave your questions there in the chat, and I will be gladly solving any question that you have, okay? So let's go on and start with this very interesting topic. We are going to see today that this celebration contains a very important symbolism, or actually many symbolisms, on a process, perhaps the most important one, that every initiate who aspires to self-realization must experience. So we must understand that Christmas, or the birth of the child God, is not something particular to Master Jesus. That is like the first thing that we need to start understanding here. But that many masters, initiates from different eras, from different times and cultures, have reached this, have lived this. And this has been what have marked their path towards true enlightenment. To get to become gods, to get to become awakened beings or enlightened beings. So it is not surprising that we find that there are so many similarities in the lives of different gods and masters. For example, we see that Mithra or Dionysius or Cronus or Krishna or Horus in Egypt, for example, or Zoroaster or a Buddha, etc. It is said that they were born on December 25th and from an immaculate conception. And well, there are many other similarities, but those are like the ones that we are going to focus on today. And some people, unaware of the background of all of this, have said that Master Jesus was credited with being born on December 25th, or being born from an immaculate conception, by plagiarizing things from paganism or trying to suffocate the pagan festivals, when the reality is that this Christmas thing is actually something that is actually a universal process, and every initiate who does the inner work that we are going to talk about today will live his Christmas internally. That is the birth of his inner Christ, and Christ is a force of our consciousness. And actually, regardless of the day and month that it is in the physical world, when that person achieves this point in the development of his consciousness, in his internal worlds, it will be December 25th. And well, in a moment, we are going to see the meaning of this date. And well, we have explained, for example, in the lecture 28 of the phase A of the self-knowledge course that we teach here, that although Christification is not an exclusive process of Master Jesus, he had a very, very particular and important mission, and it was to represent with his very life the cosmic drama of Christification. That is, that he came to show us with each step of his life the entire process that every initiate who is on the path to self-knowledge and liberation must live internally. And for what? Well, so that this message will remain as it has been, although it has been like very misinterpreted. It remained marked in the collective memory, and that have such an impact that it will resist the passage of time. So anyone who, even a long time later, obtains the symbology or the keys to understand the esoteric symbology or the astral symbology can easily decipher the path that this master has traced for us with his very life. Well, the word Christmas in English comes from Christmas, or a mass offered in memory of the Nativity of Christ. In Spanish, for example, which is the language that I speak, Christmas is Navidad, which comes from the Latin, nativitas, which means birth. So we are talking about the same thing. And the important thing is to begin to understand that although by now the sense of what is being celebrated in these dates has been lost, even if it is in an exoteric level, that is, we are celebrating the birth of Jesus the Christ. And well, actually this holiday has become just a celebration of consumerism, materialism, partying, alcohol, gifts, etc. Much more has been lost, the sense that this whole process, this whole celebration actually has a reality within us. And it's important that we get to understand that, and that we get to know that the important thing is that we get to live Christmas in our hearts. That we do the necessary work of spiritual development so that this wonderful force of Christ can be born and develop within us, because it is actually useless for us to celebrate many Christmases externally if we never get to celebrate that Christmas of the heart, which is without a doubt the most important event in the life of any man. And well, actually, in this universe, there are billions of planets, and all of them serve for the formation of solar men. However, the planets are counted, and among those planets, we find this planet Earth, in which we inhabit, which, thanks to the level of degeneration in which we can fall due to the level of ego that is developed in these planets, if a being seeks to get up, seeks to awaken on one of these planets, he can reach the level of Christ or of Superman. Actually, we speak about that in the lecture number 50 of the self-knowledge course, when we were talking about the origin of the ego. And well, most people are unaware of this reality. We must become aware of this, and we must know that the Christ is the Son of Man. So, for the Christ to be born in us, we must first become true men, since right now we are just rational animals. And well, it turns out that we are going to find all the symbolism of the process of first becoming a man in the life of another biblical character that was Moses. Actually, Moses represents the force that is born in us and that does the work of the first mountain of initiation, a process through which we are going to manage to manufacture our human soul, thus becoming a true man. We know that the Bible is divided into the Old Testament and the New Testament. So the Old Testament tells us about the process of Genesis, or the creation through the waters of our inner world and our human soul in 7 days, which actually represents the 7 bodies or 7 levels of consciousness. And the New Testament is already about the work of the second mountain of initiation that begins with the birth of the inner Christ, and in which the entire process of the apocalypse takes place, which is apocalypse is the end by fire of all of our lower nature. So we are going to look today at different symbolisms, first from the life of Moses, so that we can relate them to our inner path and to the work on the first mountain of initiation. Then we are going to reach the birth of Christ, and we are going to see the different symbolisms in the birth of Jesus and how this whole process will take place within us. And we are also going to analyze the meaning of various elements that we find at Christmas, such as the Christmas tree and its decorations. And we will even talk about Santa Claus, who also has his special symbology in relation to our inner work. So let's begin by looking at the symbolism that is contained in the life of Moses. Well, I told you that Moses represents that force that is born in us and that develops through the work of the first mountain or the creation of the solar bodies. Biblically, Moses means the one saved from the waters. And this is because we are going to rescue that inner force when we receive this knowledge and we begin to make a wise use of our internal waters, which is, our sexual creative energy, by achieving chastity and practicing the suprasexuality. Then when we are living that process, we are going to see in the astral that we are going to have a baby, a very beautiful baby, and that child will grow, and he will be growing as we progress through the different initiations of the first mountain, which and with each initiation he will be 7 more years old. In the biblical story, the people of Israel for those times were enslaved by Egypt. Well, actually, Egypt, because all of this has a symbology in our interior world. Remember that we are a microcosm, so actually everything has to do with ourselves, with our inner world, with our inner path. And well, Egypt represents the ego in us, and the people of Israel represents the 97% of our consciousness that is currently trapped in the ego. We all have this percentage of awareness and essence trapped in the ego. And if you have studied the astral symbology that we shared through this page, and those who don't have it can ask me and I will gladly pass it on to you. Children represent consciousness, and that is what the ego always seeks. The ego always seeks to annihilate our consciousness, seeking that the force that can lead us to free ourselves, to get to know ourselves, never grows and never gets to develop within us. So here in this story, you are just seeing that representation. Well, actually, Moses' mother puts him in a basket in the Nile River to save him. And there he is found by an Egyptian princess who takes him as her son. And she calls him Moses because he's the one saved from the waters. And well, I know actually I'm here giving you biblical history classes. But the idea is that we are going to make the relationship and the symbolism behind, we are going to see the symbolism behind this whole process that until now we only knew externally. So, what we must understand is that this entire process of the birth of Moses is related to the beginning of our inner work, and that the Israelites that must be liberated from Egypt, are all those essences that are currently trapped within our ego, and that we are going to start releasing with the practice of the psychological death, and that we are going to begin to make them ascend through our spine with the practice of suprasex, after the sacred fire of the Kundalini has been lit within us. That is the liberation of Israel. And well, actually, all those points that I'm giving you here, we explain them in detail in the Phase B lectures of the Self-Knowledge course. Well, another interesting symbolism in the life of Moses is the fact that he was instructed in two wisdoms, being that his biological mother actually managed to be employed as a nanny there. She managed to instruct Moses in the wisdom of Israel, but at the same time, Moses was instructed in the wisdom of Egypt by his, adoptive mother, who was the Egyptian princess. And well, what does this represent? This represents that as we do this inner work, we are going to receive two kinds of wisdom. The wisdom that we are extracting from the death of the ego, that is represented by the wisdom of Egypt, and the wisdom that our inner being, our particular God, is giving us with the creation of each one of the internal bodies. Wisdom about divinity, about the different dimensions, about our particular vocation, about the universe, and about the gods. A lot of wisdom. And this wisdom is represented by the wisdom of Israel. So we can also see the word Israel, that is formed by the three forces of divinity, that are the same three forces of our consciousness, which is Father, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. There we find it as Isis, Ra, and El. Isis is where our Divine Mother, which is in us the force of the Holy Spirit. Ra is the force of God the Father, which is the force of wisdom of our consciousness. And El, which is the force of God the Son, which is the force of justice of our consciousness. So there you find your inner being. So, okay, and well, to Moses, God appears through a burning bush, as we studied in the lecture 28 of the Phase A, about the relationship between divinity and fire. And well, God entrusts him with the mission of liberating the people of Israel. And that is the mission that are being entrusted to each one of us when we receive the knowledge of the three factors for the consciousness revolution. And that mission is that we set free all of our consciousness from the ego. So here you find in this representation. But then Moses goes to Pharaoh to ask him to release Israel, and Pharaoh refuses to do so. And well, actually, the Pharaoh represents our tyrannical mind, which at the moment that this spiritual longing arises in us and we begin to recognize, the path and the important mission that we have, our tyrannical mind comes up with all kinds of excuses, justifications for not working on ourselves, so that we never get to free ourselves. But what happens that Moses shows the power of his being to Pharaoh by turning his cane into a snake, into a cobra snake. And you know that the cane represents the spine, and the snake represents the Kundalini, which is the igneous serpent of our magical powers. But even so, Pharaoh refuses to let go the people of Israel because our tyrannical mind, even having verified the power of the supersexuality, the power of the Kundalini in ourselves, still is going to continue to refuse to really surrender to the inner work and to truly practice the psychological death. Then another process begins to be lived, which we also find in the story of Moses, and they are the pests. And these pests represents those karmas that the divine law is releasing to us, so that we get to understand the urgency of inner work. And well, you see that the last of those pests, the one that like really managed to break down or to break the will of Pharaoh, was that of the death of the firstborn. And what these pests represent is when we start losing those things to which we are like most attached in life, because then we start to understand like the fleeting of all things, and the insubstantial of clinging to the things of the personality. And then yes, we decide to do the inner work like decisively. And well, actually the idea is that we don't have to wait to go through all these processes, and that we right now or already generates the strength to begin to work on ourselves. And well, the liberation of the people of Israel, for which Moses, divided the Red Sea, also represents something very interesting. Yeah, as we have studied in the Phase B lectures, in order for the sacred fire of the Kundalini to ignite in our spine, it is necessary to carry out a process of purification of our internal waters, which is our sexual energy. And we need to turn them from black, which is how we all have at the beginning our inner waters because of the fornication and all the ego that we have inside. We need to turn them into first white or clear crystal waters. And then we need to take them to a higher level of purification through the work of balancing the energetic centers that we possess. And we are going to be taking these waters to yellow. And then we need to make a harder work to turn these waters, to purify these internal waters even more, and turn them into red waters. And that is already when the sacred fire of the Kundalini has been lit. And this is what the Red Sea represents. And the important thing is to know that only when the sacred fire has been lit in our spine, all the essences that we have released from the ego with the psychological death can begin to be fused in our spine and can no longer be trapped by the ego. And this is represented in that when the people of Israel finish crossing the Red Sea, Moses closes the sea, drowning there a large part of Pharaoh's army that Pharaoh's at last minute had repented of letting the people of Israel go. And that is what is represented here, the liberation of the essences and how they start to be fused in our spine, also creating the existential bodies of the being. And well, then we have in this story the whole journey through the desert that lasted 4 years. I'm not going to enter into detail on all these processes because we wouldn't finish this study today. But these 4 years are related to the creation on the first mountain of the first 4 solar bodies: the physical, the astral, the mental, and the causal body. So this is a teaching about the first mountain. And the Israelites, led by Moses, they are led by Moses towards the promised land. And what is the promised land? Well, the promised land is our superior centers, the superior centers of consciousness. And there is something interesting in this, and that is that God tells Moses that he will be able to contemplate the promised land, but that he will not be able to enter it. And why? Because that force, that is Moses, only goes to the end or till the end of the first mountain. Once the first mountain of initiation is finished, this force, which has internally reached maturity at that point, now represents the old man in us. And this old man must die so that at his death can be born that revolutionary force that is the Christ, who comes to do the work of the second mountain. Now, we start with the creation of the fifth body, which is the last body that we need to create in the first mountain, because the Buddhic and the Atmic bodies, we don't have to create them because they are fully created and in a solar state, because they didn't fallen with the fall of the man. They are there. And we just need to create these first 5 bodies, and with that create a human soul. So we have the right to join these 2 superior bodies, okay? And well, in this point, when we start creating our causal body, the decision of the path comes. And this is like the ultimate test that we are going to experience on the first mountain, where we have to decide between the path of the nirvana or the direct path, which is the path of the Christification. If we choose the path of nirvana, and well, actually out of 1,000 initiates who reach that point, 999 take that path and betray their inner Christ. And what happens that if we choose the path of nirvana, we will only remain at the level of man, because having already created 5 bodies, we already have a human soul. That is to say that at that point we are already true men. But by making that decision, by betraying our inner Christ, we get stuck on the way. We strike down the tower, and it cannot become a tower of fire, because the fire stays up to the level of the larynx, because here is where the causal body is. And when we take that decision of the nirvana, we lose the right to join the 2 superior bodies, because we don't take the hard and narrow path, which is the path that takes us to the direct path, that take us to join the Buddhic and the Atmic bodies. And well, this internally, this process that I'm saying here of, well, this decision and having to, nirvana or the direct path, is internally lived on December 16. 16 in Kabbalah represents the tower. And if we choose nirvana, is the struck down tower. But if on the contrary, we decide to do our Father's will, and we choose the direct path, then we get to arrive to Bethlehem. And well, actually Bethlehem means tower of fire or Chaldean tower. And this represents that those who take that straight direct path or straight path, that hard and narrow path, they have, as I was saying, the right to unite their divine soul. You already have a human soul. You have the right to join your divine soul, which is the Buddhic body. And what they do is that they raise the fire to the superior centers, to their pituitary and their pineal gland. And well, that is the reason why the Christ and saints are represented with that aura of light, that illuminates their head. Well, actually, it's because of this sacred fire of the Kundalini there in their tower, and that is a tower of fire, and that is the arrival in Bethlehem. And well, actually, it's from that union, from the human and the divine, where or from where that revolutionary force, that is the Christ, that is the fire of fire, will be gestated. And well, the process of, because now we are going into the Christ. We already saw Moses, the first mountain. Now we are almost there. We are almost in Christmas. So the process of the Immaculate Conception of Mary that gestate the Christ by work and grace of the Holy Spirit must also be understood. Actually, Mary symbolizes our divine soul, who will gestate that force of Christ, and the Holy Spirit represents the creative force of our sexual energy. And this symbolizes that this force of Christ was generated through or thanks to the suprasexuality, thanks to the spiritual birth, by practicing sexual magic with our partner without ever reaching fornication. That is why Mary is considered a virgin. And well, Joseph also it's important here. Well, everyone is important. Joseph actually represents our human soul and represents our astral body. That is why here the annunciation to Joseph is in a dream, or for example, when Herodes try to kill the child, he is also advised in a dream. And that is why, for example, in the Old Testament, you find that Joseph, that was also an interpreter of dreams, because Joseph is the astral body. And Joseph is warned in a dream that the Christ is going to be born, and not to be afraid to receive it. And this happens because the initiate at that point will feel fear of everything that is coming to him in the second mountain. Actually, not for nothing, 999, of 1,000 take nirvana, since very few are willing to internally live all the way of the cross that Master Jesus lived in the flesh. They have to live it internally, but very few are really willing to do this in order to achieve the final liberation. Well, what happens that when you take the decision and you go there, astrally they tell the initiate not to be feared, since it is that force of the Christ, the one that is going to be in charge of doing the whole work of the second mountain, and that the Christ is always a winner. The Christ is the one that is coming to save our inner world. And well, what happens that from then on, Christmas Day begins to approach for the initiate, and internally he will be able to witness certain events and certain elements that we currently find in the celebration of Christmas, and that we actually don't know their deep meaning. For example, the initiate at that point will be able to see internally that his Christmas tree is already fully lit and fully decorated. And what does the Christmas tree represent? Well, actually the pine represents our spine with all of its nervous ramifications. Spine. Yeah, I'm seeing that now. And well, all of its nervous ramifications. And well, in this case, it is the spine of the initiate at that point is already completely filled by the sacred fire. So it is completely lit. And each of the lights that you find there in the pine represents the essences that we have been releasing with the psychological death during the work of the first mountain. And they are of different colors because some of them belongs to the sexual center, which is the red, others to the instinctive center, which is the orange, others to the lower emotional center, which is the yellow, others to the lower mental center, which is green, others to the motor center, which is blue, well, and so on. And well, another element is the star that we find at the top of the tree. And well, actually, that must be a six-pointed star, which is the star of Bethlehem. And that star, that six-pointed star, represents the union of the human with the divine. A triangle that goes up, which is the human soul, and or the union with this triangle with the triangle that goes down, which is the divine soul. That is like the correct star to be on the Christmas tree, and that is the star that initiate is going to have here. Well, actually, at this time, it is mistakenly changed by the five-pointed star, but that only represents the solar man with the five bodies. Actually, the correct star is the six-pointed star. And well, the red balls and the bells that we find in the Christmas tree, they represent the sexual gonads and the female uterus. And this representing that all this tree was created, was developed thanks to the knowledge about the wise use of sexuality. And also the Christmas canes, if you see their shape, we see that it represents the same journey that our sexual energy takes in the practice of the supersets, all the way through the spine to the point between the eyebrows. That is the base cleft. And these canes are white and red because red represents, or is the color for sex, or for the sexual center. And white is the color that represents chastity. So here is the representation of the purity in sex, through which this is created. And well, the initiate can also find in his internal world his own Santa Claus, because internally, well, since many people says that Santa Claus is actually not something of Christmas, well, it does have a representation. Nothing happens in the physical world if it hasn't come from above. That is the reality. And well, what happens that Santa Claus actually represents an aspect of Atman, which is our intimate, that is found there in the pineal gland, in our superior intellectual center. And he goes down the chimney to bring the presents on Christmas Eve, because the chimney represents also our spine, and Santa Claus goes down there, because it is like this force, but at the same time, it is a fluid that comes from our brain through our medulla and comes to bring gifts to our sexual center. And these gifts, what they represent are the powers and the faculties that received all those who choose to incarnate their intimate Christ. And well, you can see that the fireplace is lit, and this is representing the sacred fire at the base of the spine. So you see that we are like seeing the same thing here. And well, actually the elves that help Santa make gifts throughout the year actually represents our internal gnomes, which are the elementals of the earth, who work in our sexual center, creating the different bodies that give us access to the different forces, virtues, powers, and faculties. And well, on Christmas, we also find children, and we find Christmas carols, and that represents that the children represents the already liberated essences that happily sing. They're asking for the child to be born, because these essences know that is this child God, this superior force that is about to be born, who is going to rescue the rest of the essences that are still there, trapped in the ego. And well, at this point, the moment of the arrival in Bethlehem in order to give birth to the Christ comes. And what happens at there? They close all the doors to Mary and Joseph, where they, ask for a lodging for the child to be born. And this actually has a representation because this represents a reality that the initiate lives at that point. Although internally he is about to live the greatest event that a human being can experience, in the physical world he will find much rejection, and many doors will be closed to him. And this because the Christ is born in the moments of maximum conscious sacrifices and voluntary suffering. And well, in the end, they find someone who gives them shelter there in a stable, and the child is born there in a manger, in a stable surrounded by animals. And this is actually representing the fact that this golden child, that is the intimate Christ, which is a mixture between the human and the divine, comes to incarnate in a person who still has a lot of ego. The initiate, despite having made a great effort on the first mountain, eliminating the psychological defects of his visible moon, still has alive like the heaviest selves of his psychology, those of the invisible moon, and they're the seven causal selves, or the seven heads of legion. And these are represented by the different animals on that stable. And well, now, when Christ is born, the whole universe gets like the news about it. And great masters and beings from all over the universe come to witness that internal ceremony and come to give congratulations and to give strength to that initiate. And the Christ, as I said at the beginning, is always born on December 24th at 12 at night, at midnight, because Kabbalistically, 24 is 2 plus 4, which is 6. And 6 in Kabbalah is the indecision in its negative aspect, and means love, or is love in its positive side. And since we have transcended the indecision by choosing the direct path, love has the right to be born, because that is what the Christ is. The Christ is the fire of the fire, which represents love. And he is born at midnight because he is the midnight sun that comes to bring light out of darkness. And this is represented actually at a macrocosmic level by the winter solstice. And well, he's born at 12 at midnight, which is December 25th already, because December 25th Kabbalistically is 7, 2 plus 5, and this 7 represents order, represents the chariot of war. And this is symbolizing the work that comes to perform that little child that has been born inside the initiate, that is very little, but actually is a completely revolutionary force that comes to put a total order inside the person and wage a war against the heaviest intelligence of his psychology. And this child, just like Moses, will grow as the initiations of the second mountain are made. He grows from 7 to 7. And the Black Lodge will also try to kill that initiate, in this case in a physical way, because Herod, who tried to kill the baby Jesus, remember, and Joseph was warned about that. Herod actually represents the Black Lodge, but the external Black Lodge, the Black Lodge that manages the physical world. and they are going to try to kill the initiate, but the inner being is not going to allow that, and will warn that initiate in the astral world, in a dream, in a conscious dream, to hide, and the first initiations of the second mountain are hidden, It's the same, for example, that the first years of Christ, you know nothing about them. That is like the representation there. And well, actually, we are going to be, this inner Christ, if we go there, we are going to be living all of this process. The Christ is going to be born in us, is going to live the entire way of the cross, but internally, which is the process that Master Jesus lived in a physical form. But we are going to speak in detail about this process of the way of the cross, which is the work of the second mountain, during the Holy Week. There, we are going to do another special study on that topic. And well, the idea of this study that I have shared with you today is that we understand that although the Christ is born 1,000 times in Bethlehem, it is actually useless if he is not born in our hearts as well. And that even if he died and risen on the third day, it is useless if he is not born and rises in us too. So what I encourage you and everyone who feels this spiritual longing is to decide to work on yourself, to decide to start practicing the 3 factors for the consciousness revolution, which is, the psychological death, the spiritual birth, and sacrifice for humanity that we teach here in this free self-knowledge course that we transmit in this page, because they are the only 3 objective works that can lead us to walk victoriously all this path towards liberation. And well, that is the invitation, and that is like the purpose of giving you all of this information. And well, this is the study that I wanted to bring you today on this interesting subject. Remember that if you at any point have any question, don't hesitate to leave your questions down there, and I will be gladly solving any question that you have, okay? And well, we will continue to see each other. Well, you are going to see me because I cannot see you in the different lectures of the course. And well, this has been all for today. Have a happy rest of the year, and well, have a good and spiritually prosperous new year. Well, see you the next time. Ciao, ciao. Thank you very much.